It's time for Tycoons of Small Biz, spotlighting the true backbone of the American economy, the true tycoons of business in America, the owners, founders, and CEOs of small businesses. The show's hosts, Austin Peterson and Landon Mance, are registered representatives of Lincoln Financial Advisors Corporation, a broker-dealer member SIPC, and registered investment advisor. The views expressed by your hosts, Austin and Landon, are not necessarily the views of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Let's lean in as Austin and Landon connect with this week's Tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons, and welcome to today's episode of Tycoons of Small Biz. I am Austin Peterson, your host, and joined as always by my co-host, the best co-host in the business, Landon Mance, coming to us live this week again from the Mance family Mance in Dana Point, California. So we're happy that you were able to take some time away from the surfing and the sunshine to join us on the radio program today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely happy to make myself available.
And as frequently as we have Ryan Weissmueller on the program, our guests, our listeners should be used to having Ryan on the program now. Ryan is a friend of the program, an important part of what we do here at Tycoons of Small Biz, and we're excited to have you in the studio again with us today, Ryan.
Great to be back as always, gents.
Yeah, so do not adjust your TV sets. This is not a commercial for, with before and after photos of, Just for Men, for example. I would be the before, Landon would be the after, and Ryan's kind of like halfway through.
I'm not sure how to take that. I'm just gonna let that one go.
Well, you don't have as much gray in your beard as I do, is what I was
enough.
getting at. So, all right, that one fell flat. It doesn't happen often, but my jokes do fall flat from time to time. So let's jump in. So, Ryan, I think we've got so many topics that we could discuss with what's going on. I mean, obviously, we know we just came through this worldwide pandemic, and we're certainly not on the other side of it 100% yet. We still see it in our day-to-day. My family's trying to plan vacations this summer because it's that, inevitable last summer that my youngest child's going to be home before heading off to college. And so we're trying to kind of cram some things in, and we got problems. American Airlines is canceling flights. Southwest is canceling flights. And so trying to schedule everything. And then the Delta variant, we're flying through London where we were trying to go. So, we're definitely not all the way through this, but at the same time, the biggest part of it's over. I feel like the economy's turning a little bit. The relief, packages and so forth that have been out there with government aid to help small businesses is kind of non-existent going forward, except for maybe restaurants and a few other, venues, for example. But there's also so much that has kind of just changed. And all of our listeners are not in Arizona, but I do want to start with kind of the tax update with what's going on in Arizona and what, Governor Ducey's done recently, because it is kind of a big thing. I mean, when it came out and everything was kind of signed into law last year, there were many business owners that I saw posting on LinkedIn, like making plans to get out of the state because it was so detrimental to business owners. So why don't we just kind of start with explaining a little bit about what was signed back then and kind of where we are today, so that the business owners here in Arizona understand what we're talking about and how impactful it is.
Sure. So what you're referring to in just the brief history is Proposition 208, which was controversial at the time. And I will preface all this. My wife's a former teacher. She's still in the education space, so I'm very pro-ed. What that initiative did was raise taxes significantly on higher income earners in Arizona, to the point where I think it would have made us one of the top 6 or 7 state income taxed states in the country. So there was, to your point, Austin, and I had dealt with that a lot with clients of ours. There was some real fear of, okay, I'm moving my business to Nevada, or, I've got to be careful because this is a real material impact. So what just was signed into law by Governor Ducey a week or two ago, actually a few changes. And I would preface all of this by saying, talk to your individual CPA to find out exactly how this fits you, because there's a lot of fine print here, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Effectively, what it did for 2021 was cap the income tax rate in the state of Arizona. So it's effectively the same as it was prior. And then they've made some fairly sizable changes to the tax code going forward in 2022 and thereon. that again are going to cap it, so it will still stay competitive. The other interesting wrinkle that's popped into this is there's actually now an exemption for business owners who have pass-through income, which a lot of, I'm sure, your clients and certainly companies we work with, and most small businesses are pass-through entities. So it actually gives them the ability to select an even lower rate. So really what this does, I think, we'll see how the dust settles on this. It tiers down over the course of, I think, 3 or 4 years through 2026. But the long and the short of it, and the solace everyone can take away now, is don't panic. Your taxes aren't going up dramatically. Arizona is still going to be competitive, which was another concern of having more businesses come here, because we've seen this influx from, Washington, California, other states. So I think on the whole, for the business community, very, very, very good news. It's been celebrated in the business circles. But for the individual specifics, talk to your tax accountant as always, and find out how it affects you, and if there is any tweaking in terms of course of action you want to take.
Yeah, always good advice. And that's the thing, is that Arizona has, I wouldn't say specifically necessarily under Governor Ducey, but he's definitely pro business and has pushed so many things to make businesses want to come to the state of Arizona. And that was, when that hit, it was something that just kind of fell flat. And all of a sudden you've got business owners who are thinking, whoa, because as we all know, business owners specifically with pass-through income, whether it's going into their pocket or not, they're high income earners. It puts a very big detriment to the bottom line and what investments they make in hiring new employees and driving, forward the overall tax base in our country, not our country, but in our state.
Yeah, and I think just in general, I mean, I had one CEO say to me basically, why would I continue to take the risk?
Yeah,
and so the entrepreneurialism in general is a risk reward proposition. Yes, there can be a nice payout at the end, but there's a lot of risk that goes along with that. And so I think just as you said, there's a bit of a deep breath, a pause, and I think in light of still all the other disruption you're talking about, it's a piece of good news for the business community for Arizona in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we've got to pivot. So let's get kind of the tax stuff out of the way early in the program, but let's talk about taxes overall, right? Because Biden's, put his tax proposal forward. There are a lot of things in there that have got a lot of people very nervous. 1031 exchanges. I talked to commercial real estate brokers and developers, and they're very nervous about the 1031 exchange provision that's in there. Capital gains. There's a lot of things that we can kind of unpackage. So I'll follow your lead, and you can talk to us about what you think is most impactful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first and foremost, and with most any advice I'm giving to entrepreneurs, it's just take a deep breath, because there have been a lot of things talked about. There have been a lot of things discussed. The odds of some of that ever becoming law are extremely unclear. So hearing what you're saying about 1031 and even specific provisions. I mean, at one point, if you recall, in the original Biden proposals, he was even talking about massive changes to 401ks, which would have had some pretty significant impacts. So where that ultimately shakes out, I think we're going to see. I would first and foremost just urge a little bit of caution. There are talks of getting rid of 1031s, or at least significantly capping those. There's talk of capital gains tax going up, obviously income tax going up. I mean, a lot of these things, again, are going to impact the small business. But the other thing that I would point to is you're not really seeing a ton get done in Washington super quickly right now anyway. And that's been the case for a while. Even Trump's tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I think it was called. It took 18 months to pass, and it changed a lot from where it started. So I would urge a little bit of caution. I mean, are there odds that taxes are going to go up at some point under this administration? Probably. But again, looking at a trend, and I actually saw a fantastic piece of imagery the other day that was a slide that was just showing what tax rates have done over the last, I think, 45 years in the United States. They go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. But when you look at entrepreneurial production over that period of time, it really hasn't taken a sharp decline as a result. There's going to be, the good entrepreneurs are going to figure out a way to work through this. Don't panic. Don't let it, cause you to all of a sudden make a massive decision differently. The one thing that's been interesting, and I'll touch on this for a second. I know we were going to touch on M&A a little bit today, but we're actually seeing potential buyers, PE and others, use taxes as a scare tactic to try to encourage sellers to dump their businesses. Hey, capital gains are going to go up next year. You better sell this now and try to get some lower prices. And again, that may make sense if the price tag's big enough, but urge some caution. Don't panic. We'll see what happens. And from everything, I mean, again, if you look at how slim the margin is in the Senate, the odds of a massive overhaul, I think at this point are pretty slim. And just pay very close attention. And again, your local CPA is probably as good of a resource as any and how some of this might impact you directly. But don't hit the panic button just yet.
Yeah, I think it's definitely early, right? And just because it bears repeating, we aren't giving any tax advice on the program today. Just want to make sure that that's very clear. But the reality is, it's important to know how it could potentially affect you and make decisions. And you talk about PE groups and other groups that are out there trying to use this as a scare tactic. Landon and I were on a conference this morning talking about growth and exit planning, and how that is actually the case, where a transaction that took place recently, where for years and years and years, we're talking about deferring taxes or doing anything that we can to minimize taxes. And all of a sudden we do have business owners who are saying, let's just pay them, because I don't want to risk that they are right and that it's going to go up. It likely is going to go up. Will it be as dramatic as what's proposed? Probably not. But you do see that business owner taking a little bit different tact and saying, you know what, let's kind of take some of that risk off the table. And I don't want to write a big check to the IRS, but it's probably the smart thing to do.
And I think it goes to. And I know we've all talked about this a lot, because I think we see the world so similarly. But it stresses all the more importance of having the right team of people around you. If you don't have a tax accountant that you can have these in-depth conversations with, that's feeding you some information on how something might impact you, you might want to get a new one. Because having that right team from a wealth perspective, from a tax perspective, from a legal perspective, I think now as much as any, with just all the potential, the dust has settled on some ends, there's a lot more dust to settle elsewhere. Having those resources, I don't think's ever been more important. And unfortunately, we saw through the pandemic and some of the real chaos, and I know a number of companies that were burned. They didn't have the right, strategic partners around them. So, seek that out, get it. You're not going to get a concrete answer on you should definitely do this, but at least understand your options and how you navigate some things. I even remember when the qualified business deduction first came out as part of the last tax bill. I mean, there was a lot of different machinations and different ways people were talking about things, but you were still seeing good advice from good people. I don't think there should ever be a shortage of that. So,
yeah, I agree. I think actually that's how you and I first met each other, was a webinar that you did on qualified business deductions, and that's how I got the intro to Ryan W, as we say. And I actually want to hit on the team thing, so I'm going to take that a little bit one step further, and I'm going to let Landon jump in here, but the importance of having a team is, the reality is, your tax person looks at things through a tax lens. Your attorney looks through things through a legal lens, right? Your financial planner looks through things through a financial lens. So you put them all around the table at the same time, and they can each weigh in on those aspects of a decision that you're making, so that you can make the right decision overall, rather than a myopic decision based on one aspect of who your main advisor should be. And that's really the importance of having a team around you, but a team that collaborates together and is truly sitting around that table together.
Couldn't agree more. And that's I think you've hit it right on the head. It's a team. It's always a team. It takes a village. And I think the other side is, you see, I'm sure you guys have seen it too. We see mistakes sometimes with entrepreneurs, where if you rely too heavy on your tax CPA, for example, you might be very cautious, or you might just be doing things for tax reasons that don't make sense elsewhere. If you're only thinking about long-term appreciation, you might miss some things on the tax side. So totally agree with you. That well-rounded advice and getting the right people. I mean, there's advisory boards, there's those, those strategic partners that I think all those groups fall into, but that's an easy no-brainer best practice that every business out there should be doing if they aren't already, because, the right people, their vested interest in your business. That's trying to say free advice, but it's as close to it as you're going to get.
Yeah. One last point I want to make, and sorry, Landon, you just sparked this with me. So, one important thing for all business owners to understand is that there's a big difference between tax preparation and tax planning. And if you don't have a CPA who's doing tax planning with you, and is just preparing what you bring to them at the end of the season, you either need a separate one to do tax planning, or I would recommend that you're looking elsewhere for somebody who's truly going to have a planning meeting with you to understand the impact of taxes on you personally and on your business, and not just prepare what you bring to them at the end of the year.
And now's not a bad time to start thinking about planning for, you have more visibility, so start thinking about planning for next year. And I would even take it further beyond CPAs. If you don't have an insurance resource that's doing that for you, if you don't have an attorney that's asking a lot of questions before they draft a document for you, that's important in any of these providers to make sure you're getting out and having some proactive discussions. You don't need an order taker. That's not going to help you, because if your order might be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. Austin, you addressed a couple questions that I wanted to ask. So you emptied my barrel a bit here, but no, I certainly have plenty. So
Plenty more.
Yeah, certainly have plenty more. Ryan, you talk about that a lot. You talk about this proverbial bench. Making sure that you've got the right strategic advisors and partners kind of on that bench. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, or suggestions or recommendations to owners around that, because how does an entrepreneur, how does he or she know if they have the right advisors that they're working with? Now, this is not a commercial for Ryan and his team, or for Austin and myself, but if I was to kind of describe Ryan and your team at FinTrepid, I would kind of describe you guys as these almost like Einsteins of important business decisions, with a focus on kind of the financial side of it. You're a CPA, by trade. I don't think you're a practicing CPA anymore. Austin and I have gotten to know you and your team and your capabilities and your thought leadership. And you guys are really uniquely positioned in the market to be this strategic partner sitting alongside your entrepreneurs and advising them in some extremely important matters around finance and operations and mergers and acquisitions. So again, this is not a commercial for you guys, but Austin and I, we know personally how good you guys are at what you do. But for entrepreneurs out there that they don't know if they've got a good team on their bench or not, how do they address that? What are some questions that they can ask just to kind of do a checkup on their team to make sure they've got the right people in place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. So I'll give you the best answer that I can. And I think in general, it's about just trying to understand as best you can where are your gaps. So for most businesses, even most entrepreneurs, most founders, they have a background in something. So maybe it's sales, maybe it's operations, maybe they're more of a creative type and invented a product. Some of them do, have a very strong financial background and then put the operations around them. So I think first and foremost, and the biggest thing I would say in that realm to any entrepreneur is know what you don't know, because that's going to help you. If you're all of a sudden getting into a position where, maybe you're all of a sudden, dealing with some things internationally, or maybe all of a sudden you've now hit a point where taxable income is really going to start mattering. That's a good time, if you don't have a good tax, accountant on board, to reach out and to find one. And I think, in terms of the criteria for those partners, to me, again, it's all about fit. You've got to have people with no different than within your team, but also around it is someone that's a good cultural fit, someone you can sit across the table from and have good dialogue, good productive dialogue. And sometimes that can be tense, productive dialogue, but someone who's not afraid, to speak truth and to speak with candor and to keep you from falling off a ledge, because let's be honest, and we're all entrepreneurs ourselves. It's hard. The entrepreneurial journey is hard. You hear about it. I mean, we had a client that sold their business about a year or just before COVID. And I mean, they've been at it for 16 years. Now, a lot of people are going to go, oh, look at the overnight success. Look what you did. 16 years of grinding for about 13 of it. So it's not easy, but I think just understanding, if you can get a sense of where you're strong, every business should have around them, because you're going to need them at some point: a good tax accountant, a good financial planner, a good insurance resource, a good attorney. I mean, you think about some of those things that are just basics. And then, depending on where your business is, do you have a really young sales team that doesn't have a lot of experience? Maybe that's the time to bring in, there's some great kind of outsourced sales resources that you can pull in, or find some training. We've had clients that brought some manufacturing in house. There's resources to help you basically map out a manufacturing floor and how you run things efficiently. So first and foremost, it's just a matter of understanding what you have and where the gaps are. There's lots of great tools out there and people out there to help you solve that. But I think the second part of the equation is the fit. We've been very blessed. We've worked with some amazing companies. We're not a fit for everybody. And that could be because the skill set doesn't align. It could be just because, culturally we don't align, or we see the things a little bit differently, and there's no right or wrong answer to it. So I think that's the key, and then leverage the network that you do have. I mean, one thing I'm a big proponent of, and I know Austin is too, is peer groups. I mean, the Vistages of the world, the EOs, that there's so many of those out there, formal or informal. But that's a great way too to, talk to different peers of, okay, who are you using? What might I be missing? Do some information share, because I would tell you, having that external team is as important as the internal one, because at some point you're going to need them. And when that big pivot comes along, when that sale opportunity comes along, when you do all of a sudden hit it, we have a client last year out of nowhere that just they were fortuitous in their positioning. It had an absolute banner year during COVID. They didn't know what to do. So, you have those things ahead of time, and you're prepared for it. So just be proactive. I mean, I know I preach that a ton, but be proactive and have the right team. And again, if you're not getting it, the other one I add to that is a good bank. You're going to need them too. So now's the time. I wouldn't wait a minute. Evaluate that. Do you have the right people in place? I mean, on the banking front for a second, if you've got a bank that you're basically at the max of what they can lend you, you might want to be thinking about what you do next. And that happens, or a bank that's just not giving you customer service, or a bank that you had a hard time with last time. I mean, now's the time to be thinking about these things. You don't want to be scrambling to get a CPA or a lender or an attorney when you need it. Get it ahead of time so you have time to really vet it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit more about, just what are the banks doing these days? But let's spend a couple minutes and talk about the M&A world and buying and selling of private businesses. I know that you and your team, you guys do a lot of advising and consulting and work with business owners when they're looking to acquire or, potentially sell their business. So, when we look at the statistics, Ryan, of private businesses that actually transact, or sell when they're listed for sale, the percentage is not great. I think it's somewhere between 20 to 25% of businesses that are actually listed for sale will successfully sell on the terms that they want. So talk to us a little bit about that world, what's going on in the small and mid-sized marketplace, and what are you guys seeing? What trends are you guys seeing?
Mm-hmm. I think first off, and this is probably no surprise, the market is still very hot. We had a client that sold their business in May of last year. 2 months after COVID started, and it really hasn't. You can really probably say since Q3, Q4 of last year to now, it hasn't slowed. I'm guessing you guys are seeing the same thing. So it's still very, very active out there. I think, certainly there's a lot of PE money. There's strategic buyers that are seeing opportunities. A couple things that I think we're seeing, or maybe some tips or words of caution is, number one, it's very easy as an entrepreneur there's kind of two mindsets. You have your mind made up that I'm ready to sell my company. I'm going to sell. What I would say in that instance is make sure you have a plan B, because just like you brought up, Landon, a lot of times these deals don't close the first time. We had a client that their sale process ended up being about 18 months, and it did finally sell, but to the third buyer. Because I think entrepreneurs underappreciate how much goes into selling the company, and how much you have to potentially take your eye off the ball operationally, How much a buyer is going to dig in, I think that's another piece that's very underestimated, is just the level of due diligence involved. And I think that's, part of why that's been a real skill set for us, is because we know how to do it. And a lot of people just get blindsided by it. I mean, when you see even the initial list that the buyer's looking for, it can cause a small heart attack. So I think, but having that plan B, and one of the things we always tell business owners is run it like you're going to own it. And if you do that well enough, a buyer's going to come along if you're valuable and pay you the money anyway. But if all you're doing is putting all your eggs in that basket of selling and you don't sell, you may have a problem, and you may have a hiccup, you may have some reversion, and that could lead to some bigger challenges. So I think that's first and foremost, number one. I think on the other side, and we're still seeing a lot of this too, is unsolicited offers. Companies just coming out of the blue and, hey, we'd like to buy your company for X. The advice I would give to entrepreneurs is if that's even on the radar, and I would tell you for 90% of the companies out there, it should be, because you never know. Always be ready. I mean, I had that conversation with the CEO the other day. I mean, get up every day, at least knowing you're ready to show something to somebody externally if you had to. And if you can't do that, that would scare me about what's happening internally, because they're going to ask for some basic information. You should have some command on some of these kinds of things. So run it like you're ready to present it to somebody. And I think if you do those two things, the rest to some extent takes care of itself, because there is retrading. Somebody finds something in due diligence they don't like. There are still a lot of buyers out there that are trying to lowball. And we're certainly seeing that as well, or change. Another one that's been very common, I think we're even seeing more of it now, is buyers trying to push holdbacks or earnouts, or much less cash up front because they're concerned about the COVID impact and want to see trends really hold. That can be dangerous. And I've seen it plenty of time where the only money a seller ever sees is what they get up front. Make sure you understand that. Make sure are the criteria very clear? If you are comfortable with that, can you truly treat that as just upside? And are you comfortable getting the cash that you get day one? Because that might be all you ever see. I think just some of those surprises really take entrepreneurs off guard. And that's something we run into a lot. But there's a lot of good deals to be had. I mean, I couldn't even tell you the dollar amount we were involved in last year, but I mean, it's awesome to be a part of that. It's awesome to see an entrepreneur realize their dream and get rewarded for all that risk that we took. But there's a lot of pitfalls and frustration and lost nights of sleep that I think, again, just being a little bit proactive, you can avoid some of that. And having a good attorney around you to navigate you through it, having a good CPA, both of them to look at the structure of the deal and make sure that, you're not getting yourself into trouble. That stuff's, just key. Don't wait till the last minute.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You made many, many good points, and it's every time you made a good point that was relevant to me, light bulb was going off. I had a client forward me an email yesterday, and this particular client has a really cool, successful company based out of Las Vegas in the travel industry. And this client got decimated last year, but now they're having the best year of their lives. So and the email that she forwarded me was it was an unsolicited email from a guy representing some wealthy investors, saying that they're looking to buy a business in this space. And this particular client has received multiple different emails from people, just unsolicited offers, wanting to sit down with them and buy their business. So I would definitely agree that it is certainly a seller's market right now. Austin and I are in the market looking for a wealth management practice to buy, and we would say it's probably 30 buyers, 30 to 50 buyers to every seller. Separate from that, I'm also looking with an outside partner to acquire a bookkeeping and accounting practice. And again, I'd probably say it's 30 buyers to every seller. So no doubt it is a seller's market right now. But I love how you say you just have to be prepared, right? You have to be prepared at all times, because you never know when that unsolicited offer is going to come in off the street. And if you're not ready, you may not have that chance again. So I love that advice. But um, Ryan, talk to us about what's going on with the banks right now. There's a lot for them to consider as companies are, possibly coming out of one of the worst years of their businesses' lives and now possibly coming into the best. So how are they approaching that with deals?
That has been one of the more interesting things we have seen, and frankly, you don't hear it being talked about a lot. And we've seen enough of it where I think it's certainly all anecdotal based on our experience. But I mean, there are definite trends that we are seeing, and we're in the middle of a number of things with lenders right now. I think one is they're not all, but there are probably 6 or 7 different ways we are seeing lenders look at the past 18 months in terms of evaluating performance. And it's anywhere from some are really almost taking like Q2 of last year and kind of throwing that out. Some are really looking very heavily at maybe last 6, 9 month trends. Some are adding PPP back in, a portion of PPP. Some are going way back and really trying to understand even, 17, 18, 19. I don't think there's one set credit box on how it's being assessed. So the one thing we're telling business owners is if you don't know how your bank's looking at you right now, you need to, because you may not need money today, but most companies have a renewal with their lender, or maybe it's covenant situations that you want to get out ahead of, or maybe you just are going to need money down the road. You don't want to find out that you're going to have a problem, or very early on. The other thing or very late on, I should say, the other thing that's transpiring is I think as a result of COVID, a number of lenders and perfect example here, we saw the news with Wells Fargo where they're getting rid of personal lines of credit entirely across the bank. A lot of lenders are making decisions that they don't want to be in certain industries. I know one decent sized kind of regional lender has completely exited the restaurant space. Took it pretty hard in COVID, so understandably so. But just understanding the shifting preferences of some banks, and do you still, are you all of a sudden a great performing company in a less desirable industry as far as your bank's concerned? That may totally catch you by surprise, but it's good to know and understand those questions, because and I'm very confident in this, there is a ton of money out there from the banking perspective. Lenders are flush. Lenders are much healthier. They were through this entire process because they didn't have the baggage that they had back during the Great Recession. So there's money out there. There's deals to be done, but it really takes a thorough understanding of what they're looking for, an ability to be able to explain your business to them. And never before have monthly trends mattered. Thinking about, I mean, we're seeing really deep analysis on, well, what's happening with the company's customers, what's happening with companies' vendors. What really, for getting into even more granular forecasts and understanding where the company's going. Their underwriting is very, very thorough, so it shouldn't be a surprise at this point. But that's another one of those. Have some of those conversations today, because again, you may not have a deal that renews till the end of the year, but if you know that, you can plan for it. You might even find, boy, we've got to shop for another lender. And we've got a client that's lender basically told them, we're not going to renew your deal. You just don't fit in, where we're going as a bank any longer. Everybody likes each other, but that's just business. Well, good to know that now when it's July, as opposed to, at the first week of December, when all of a sudden we got to scramble to make something happen.
Yeah. So I think, a couple of points that you made that were really important there that actually even carry back over to what you were talking about with the M&A space. I mean, private equity groups have a lot of cash sitting on the sidelines too. They're constantly looking for deals. The banks have the money to lend. They're healthier than they were, before. But this has shaken a lot of people, and it's given banks and everybody really an opportunity to say, let's kind of reassess what we're doing here and where we want to go from here. And we have a breath to be able to do that. And they're doing that. It's obviously their right to do that, but it just brings home the importance of that banking relationship, like you said, and understanding what it is that your bank is looking for from you and whether or not you fit in that box. And if you don't, there's another bank that has the box that you need them to have.
And I would tell you too, just to echo it, if you are a small or mid-sized business, because this is universally asked, if you're a small and mid-sized business and you can't produce good month-to-month financials and the ability to give a bank a forecast, you're not going to get very far.
Yeah,
because universally that is the first thing that every single one is asking for right now. So know that going in, and then have a good conversation and see where it goes. But I mean, they want to help you, but just realize a bank's not just going to take a flyer because and even too, you may have had 2 really good months all of a sudden coming out of COVID. Well, that's probably not enough.
Yeah.
The bank's there to they're not there to be your friend. They're not there to give you money because it's their job to give you money. They're there to manage risk and make good decisions. You've got to prove to them that you're not a risk.
Yeah. Well, and having those financials in order even goes back to what you were talking about before, and being ready to be purchased at any point, right? Because if you can't produce financials for somebody who wants to buy your business, you're in the same spot.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just take your word for it and say, well, look at my bank account, everything looks good. You've got to have those financials dialed in. It's extremely important. And one of the other things that actually came up during that segment that I wanted to mention real quick is that you have to be ready as a business owner to cross that threshold. And not every business owner is ready. And so, you've got to, it's not just the financial readiness. I've got enough money in the bank and then I sell it for this amount and I'm going to be good. It's, am I emotionally ready to let go of the reins of this business and move on to the next phase of my life?
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to be constantly thinking about that as business owners to say, what am I going to replace this business with? Because you've really lived and breathed that for the example you gave, 16 years. And now all of a sudden it's time to do something different. And if you're not ready, it can be very detrimental. And, Landon and I have even cited other statistics on this radio program and with our clients that most business owners profoundly regret selling their business the day after they've sold it. And it has nothing to do with how much money's in their bank. It's that they were not ready for the other aspects of selling a business.
And I do think it does go to the question though of having an idea too, and it's part of what you're talking about with that planning and getting ahead of it. What is enough? Because I think that's another thing that a lot of business owners. I mean, you've never thought about selling. You get an unsolicited bid to buy your company. How do you know if that's a good number if you haven't thought about it?
Yeah. Well,
might want to spend some time thinking about it.
Yeah. Do you know what your business is worth? Right. And like you just mentioned, do you know if it's enough to do what you need to do with that money for the rest of your life,
right,
without being forced to start another business? You
right.
can if you want, of course, but we call that the value gap. So how much do you need to live for the rest of your life? Is the selling of the business going to fill that gap? And if not, what are we going to do to make sure that does fill the gap by the time it's time to cross that threshold?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yep.
Right. So
go
ahead, Landon.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we don't have a ton of time left, Ryan. So let me just ask you what you think would be most important to talk about. So we can go one of two ways. Let's either spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about, some thoughts around planning for the second half of the year, or which seems to be a super relevant topic these days, the supply chain and or kind of the labor market. I think every entrepreneur listening to this right now, a lot of us tend to play in the same space, the 5 to 50 million of revenue space. I think they're all feeling this pinch, this challenge of these either the supply chain challenge or the labor challenge. So maybe you can spend a couple minutes talking about one or both of those, but I'll kind of let you decide between those two areas and just let's go down one of those two rabbit holes. You decide.
Sure. Well, I'll take the second, but it'll actually interweave a little with the first, so it'll be good. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take somebody paying super close attention to the news to know that right now two problems we have are our supply chain and a very, very tight labor market. And I think the piece that we always go to, and this is something I talk about with our clients or just any entrepreneur we're having a conversation with. Business is climbing a mountain, and sometimes on that mountain you're going up, sometimes you're going down, sometimes you're intentionally pausing at base camp, and there's nothing wrong with there can be a very good reason to do any one of those three. I think the key is if you can't hire people, don't stop. There's still something you can do. And so it is a case with labor. We're doing this actually with a client right now, is of just relooking at what their cost profile needs to be, because they're approaching it from the standpoint of our culture is going to win. We have to pay our people more. So to be competitive, to pick up market share, their margin may go down a little bit, but they're going to make more gross margin dollars by doing this and executing it properly. So use it to your advantage, because I think the labor in particular, I see some folks out there using that as a little bit of a crutch or a complaint, and I still think it's something that can be overcome. Now, it's also a great opportunity to look at, where else can you be efficient in other, in other parts. I mean, there are manufacturers out there. If you can't get labor, is it an opportunity to look at, maybe do you look at contract manufacturing and see what that does? Maybe do you look at, is there some equipment that you can go get that has much greater automation that maybe you can run it? Let's say you're only able to run at 80% of the labor capacity you want. Well, can you find something that gives you 20% more efficiency? And that may solve that equation. So I think, two things is number one, I would use it on the table, get your team involved and really hash out, okay, what are all the ways we can do something given in this labor environment? Because the answer is not just put your head in the sand and hope it passes. It probably will get better, but how much, we don't know. Because as these, a lot of it's still, you've got a lot of people that haven't come back to the workforce that some will. Where they go, we don't know. And in the restaurant business and others. And let me touch on that for just a second, because as you guys know, that industry has a special place in my heart. Have a little patience with your local restaurant. It's hard to get people. Food's going to come out slower. It may take you longer to get a table, but continue to support these guys, because it's hard, and they've been creamed as hard as anybody. So sorry, just had to interject that. But please go support your local restaurant. It matters, and we need them. But the other piece of it is and this goes to the forecasting side, is plan on, okay, what if labor costs are just higher the rest of the year? What if you have to pay your people more? What if your labor costs go up 5%, 10%? What does that look like in your overall model? And at least have that in the back of your mind of a what if, because what if the answer is, for the long-term success of your business, you just have to accept it and figure out how to operate your business in this new paradigm? Well, start planning. And like I said, I mean, in that one manufacturer scenario, that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, their labor cost has basically gone up $2 an hour. We're just planning for it. And we're reforecasting the rest of the year accordingly, and going to look at 2022 the same way. So I don't, it hurts. I think it's affecting a lot of people equally. That's certainly driving some of this inflation that we're seeing out there, but I wouldn't plan on it going away anytime soon. So plan with that in your plans, and certainly use that going forward, and understand what the implications are and what the options are. And then, try to look at the different what ifs like we always talk about. Shifting gears to supply chain, because you asked about that, and I would give you the same general framework, I think, with supply chain, but that one's interesting, and we don't know how lasting some of this is going to be either. And we have a client of ours that actually, they will probably end the year about 18 to 20% below the revenue they could have done had they been able to get all their supply. They could have sold everything that they had. They just couldn't get enough. So I would say the same thing from a planning perspective. So what does it look like if you only get 80% of the product you need between now and the end of the year? What changes does that cause you to make? Do you cut back on marketing spend? A lot of companies right now are diversifying, which I would say is very smart too. Maybe you had 2 suppliers before, get 4. Look at where you're supplying from. A lot of companies, I think it's a good best practice, were maybe heavily reliant on China, that are now China, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Mexico, even domestically. So I think looking at where things are coming from, and the other thing to be prepared for, and this is another piece going back to the banking conversation for a minute, you may want to sit on larger inventory positions than you were doing a year ago, because you need to keep that raw material or that product in stock. Well, that takes money. So, that's a good opportunity to go to your bank and again, have a good business case, but whether it's a use of internal capital or going to your lender, we may need to bump our line of credit a little bit, because we're going to take larger inventory positions. That's going to allow us to sell through, but it's going to assure us that we have the product we need. So I think no different than planning with anything. And right now it's supply chain and labor. A year from now, it's going to be something else. But put the variables on the table, understand the what ifs, plan around it, take some action, because the thing I'll always say, the entrepreneur is always going to win. Always. It's since entrepreneurialism began, the entrepreneur always won. And so if you're sitting on the sidelines too aggressively, if you're scared to make a move, chances are the competitor next to you is not. And being left behind is far worse than dealing with a supply chain issue right now.
Yeah, no, excuse me, no doubt about it. I mean, we have this whole program because we know that the entrepreneur, the small business owner in this country is truly the backbone of the economy. We know that no matter what happens with the tax code, the entrepreneur is going to lead our country out of this. Same thing with the pandemic. We said it when we started this program, which was right at the beginning of the pandemic, that the entrepreneur will figure it out. And that's the greatest thing about the entrepreneurial spirit, specifically in our country, is that we put our foot forward and we figure out how to do it. Now, we're at the end of the program here, but if I were to wrap up essentially everything that you've said today, we've covered a lot of topics, but if I were to wrap it up into a really small sentence, it's that we've got to be proactive and plan for every aspect of our business rather than reacting, right? Because the reality is, you're right. You put your head in the sand about the labor, the supply chain issues. Everybody else is dealing with it too. Your competitors are having to pay more in labor costs too. So if you've got to raise your prices to be able to still survive because you've got to pay your people more, your competitors are doing the same thing. So I think sometimes we get too worried about, oh, I can't raise my prices because my business will go down. But we've got to understand the macro picture, and that it's not just us dealing with it, it's everybody, and it's okay to make adjustments midstream.
I think that's very well said. And the only piece that I would add on to that is have a little perspective too. I mean, chances are few entrepreneurs went unscathed over the last 18 months. Look what you already got through. I mean, you overcame the boogeyman that was COVID. You can handle labor or supply chain or the next issue that's going to be thrown at you, because I would tell you, even if their financials don't show it, a lot of businesses are much better off today than they were 2 years ago because they are more sustainable. They're able to weather these storms. I have the utmost faith in the entrepreneur. It's going to be, it's always a roller coaster, but again, the entrepreneur is always going to win. That's not going to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And they took the opportunity to examine their business a little bit more,
Mhm.
make some changes
Yep.
that were needed all along the way, but they didn't take the time to do it before. And they were kind of forced or given the opportunity to do it this time.
Mhm.
So, well, Landon, close us out. You're the show closer.
You got to bring in the heavy hitter to, take it all the way home. So, Ryan, Austin and I, we're planners, right? That's that's what we do. You are obviously a planner. A lot of business owners, that's just not necessarily something that comes naturally to them, right? So we've sat here, and in my opinion, you guys probably agree, we've had a super productive, a great conversation, and a lot of it's been around planning. But for the entrepreneurs that are listening to this, they're going, they might be going, that's great, but I don't have time. I don't have time to do that stuff. I don't have time to plan for all these different things that you guys have talked about. So for that entrepreneur that might be saying that right now, what advice would you give them so that they can start to be a little bit more proactive in some of this stuff that we're talking about? I know you only got about a minute or two to answer, but
You're fine.
go ahead, please.
I think the best piece of advice that I would say, one of my favorite quotes, there was a world-renowned mountain climber that he was stuck in a blizzard on a mountain in the Himalayas or Nepal or somewhere, and they asked him, "How'd you do it?" He said, "I just took the next 3 feet, and then the next 3 feet, and the next 3 feet, and I 3-footed my way all the way to the top." Bite it down to chunks. I think a lot of people, there's this misconception that planning is you got to sit in a conference room for a week and lock the doors, and you're expending all this brain power. Quite simply, at the core of planning, understand what moves the needle in your business. If you understand what moves the needle and what threats are out there in front of you, that's a pretty good place to start. Work from there. Get the team involved. It doesn't have to be something scary, but I would tell you, it's one of those things. It's gotten a bit cliche, but working on the business, not just in the business, especially after COVID, I don't think you have a choice. And the other thing I would say is, to my point earlier, your competitor's probably doing it. So, you don't need to have the world's best plan that's totally baked out with a nice, pretty bow on it, but take some time, think, understand what could happen, have something on paper, because the alternative is scary. And if you haven't thought about what happens, think of it no different. I mean, you don't necessarily, when you go to get in your car, think about the 20 ways that you're going to get from point A to point B. But what if as you're leaving the house, you find out that there's a really bad accident on the way? Well, you're going to go around that accident to figure out another route. It's because you knew it was there. That's what planning is. Know what the other routes are to get where you're trying to go. Know what that end goal is, and just put a little forethought into it, and do it in small chunks. You'll be better for it, and you get better and more efficient as you go. It's not easy, but it's essential.
Yep, absolutely. And just to be clear, if somebody is listening to the show right now live, or they're going to listen to this recorded here sometime in the future, all this stuff that we're talking about, can you and your team, are you guys, I mean, is that what you guys do? Are you in a position to help entrepreneurs with a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about?
It's certainly what we do on a regular basis. But the other thing I would say, go to our website. I mean, by all means, if it's questions, I mean, I have a lot of entrepreneurs that reach out to me all the time. I do this because I love the entrepreneur, and I'm just fortunate to get paid to do what I love. Always happy to have conversations if we can point people in the right direction. There's lots of great resources out there. Again, the Vistages, the EOs, those peer groups. We're always looking for good companies that we can help, but there's a lot of different options, and certainly anything that I or my team can do, even just to point somebody in the right direction, we're always happy to do that. I just want to see this entrepreneurial community get better, stronger, more sustainable. So anything we can do towards that end, we're all in and committed.
Yeah. Well, we sure appreciate you coming on and sharing all your thoughts and suggestions and considerations. For those people that do want to track you guys down, Ryan, and just pick your brain, have a conversation, buy you lunch, I mean, whatever, what's the best way for them to track you down?
Sure. I would encourage everyone to go to our website, Fintrepid, FINTREPID solutions.com. We've got blogs we put out, lots of content you can get to there. My contact info, so certainly feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We put a lot of content out there as well, and those are probably the two best options.
Excellent. All right. Well, Ryan, again, really, really appreciate everything you do for the show, for the entrepreneurs in the community. And we look forward to having you on the show again in a few months, my friend.
Look forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ryan.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, proudly hosted by Austin Peterson and Landon Mance. Austin and Landon are comprehensive financial planning professionals specializing in financial, estate, and succession planning for small business owners. Austin and Landon have offices in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, and represent clients in 14 states throughout the country. Join Austin, Landon, and the featured Tycoons live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. right here on Business RadioX and your favorite podcast.